All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the first Berman Institute of Bioethics seminar of the academic year. I am delighted to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Rachele Hendricks-Sturrup. She is the Research Director of Real World Evidence at the Duke Margolis Institute for Health Policy in Washington, D.C., where she leads and manages the Institute's Real World Evidence Collaborative and real world evidence policy research portfolio and education. As an engagement expert, biomedical researcher, bioethicist, and policy practitioner with almost 20 years of experience, her work centers on addressing implementation, regulatory, and ethical, legal, and social implications at the intersection of health policy and innovation. She currently partners with Duke University faculty, scholars, students, and external practicing experts to advance the Institute's biomedical innovation work. Please join me in welcoming Rachele.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's really exciting to be here. I collaborate a great deal with Johns Hopkins faculty and postdocs and trainees and students. So it's always wonderful to come back and spend time with you all to talk about these issues. I find these conversations to be very intimate in a good way, where we can really just kind of dig in and sink our teeth into a lot of these topics. They're very complicated. They're very ethically gray. And so that said, my lecture today is going to be more discussion driven with you all. I noticed that I think maybe, we were given time to do a Q&A towards the end, but I think what I'll do is, and I had a chance to clear this with some of our faculty leaders here, what I'm going to do is just build in discussion throughout the lecture. I've got the lecture divided into 3 different parts, really talking about 3 different things within this topic. And then we'll have some discussions, like, some pit stop discussions along the way to keep everyone awake and engaged and not feeling like I'm talking at you. So hopefully you all enjoy that format. And I certainly find it to be more engaging for everyone. So that said, I'm going to talk today with you all about ethical, legal, and social implications, or we sometimes call that ELSI for short. We're going to discuss ELSI on matters of real-world data generation and sharing in 21st century medicine and beyond. And when I say 21st century medicine, I'm really alluding to the 21st Century Cures Act, which was enacted about almost 10 years ago, where a lot of innovation was spurred through this act, focused on real-world data, genomics, and other areas that we continue to see develop today. So, so that said, here's an overview of what we're going to go over. We're going to really talk about, well, at least with being grounded in areas in which we perceive health system trustworthiness and where we can do better around that. We're going to take a deep dive into 3 topics. The first we'll talk about is individuals' willingness to share real-world data with researchers. So we all know we're just generating loads of data today, way more than we ever have, and literally in every aspect of our lives, not just our electronic health records, not just our social media data, but we are actively generating data in very passive ways, in very intentional ways. And that data is usable to researchers, whether they're industrial researchers or academic or otherwise. We're going to talk about individuals' willingness to share that data with researchers for a variety of purposes that could be meaningful to individuals. Or groups of individuals. And then we're going to talk about informed consent practices and challenges in innovative point of care clinical trials. That one is really exciting because, in fact, that is work that I started with a Johns Hopkins doctoral student here at Berman. Her name's Kaylee Probst. She used to work with me at the Duke Margolis Institute, and I had her lead a lot of that work that we kickstarted that I believe she's brought into her studies today. But nonetheless, we'll talk about that topic in general. We'll discuss some ethical considerations as far as informed consent practices go. And then we'll close out with our last discussion, which will focus on synthetic data generation using real-world data and generative AI. Each of these topics will have accompanying ethics questions at the end of the work that I'll present. And so again, feel free to speak up. I don't want to talk at you for this entire hour. I want to talk with you during this hour. And let's make it as fun as we can. Just dive right in, don't be shy. Again, underpinning each of these three areas is considerations around health system trustworthiness and action towards that. So this is a piece, I'll be pulling actually areas from a piece that I published at the top of this year in January in Health Affairs Forefront, where I outline very specific actions that health systems should take in order to achieve trustworthiness. So first, we'll talk about real-world data. Real-world data is often synonymously used with big data, but real-world data, at least calling data that way instead of big data, really has resonated in the healthcare and health research landscape. So when I talk about real-world data, I'm talking about data relating to patient health status and or the delivery of healthcare routinely as it's collected from a variety of sources. And this is a definition taken from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or the U.S. FDA, as they have an entire program or portfolio looking at where they can incorporate real-world data into their decision-making. And that data is transformable into what's called real-world evidence, where you have all this data. Data are basically just all your Lego pieces all over the floor, and you don't build anything, real with that until you have some sort of blueprint, some sort of plan, some sort of protocol to build something meaningful with all of those Lego pieces. And what's meaningful is what we can consider here to be the real world evidence. So that's clinical evidence about the usage and potential benefits or risks of a medical product derived from the analysis of real world data. And so this graphic here just essentially gives you an overview of where real world evidence is being used in the medical product development pipeline today. And the medical product development pipeline comprises of multiple phases. Pre-market phases involve phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, where phase 1, you're just looking at the safety of a particular therapeutic under investigation in a small population of individuals, just to make sure it's safe for delivery in that population. And then when you move into phase 2, you get a larger cohort where you're looking at other parameters around not just safety, but also efficacy. Does this intervention work in a controlled setting with this group of very pre-specified individuals? And when I say pre-specified, it means that they meet very strict inclusion and exclusion criteria to be a part of the trial. Phase 3 does the exact same, as just in a larger cohort. And where along this pipeline does real-world evidence fit in? And that is something that scientists are grappling with today. We're trying to come up with all of these elaborate study designs to find ways to say, well, what can we learn from these individuals' electronic medical records, their claims data, any registry data they might, contribute? What can we pull from those data sources to inform the work that we're doing as far as demonstrating to regulators, including but not limited to the FDA, that this intervention works in this controlled setting? And typically when an intervention works, it leads to regulatory approval. So I did mention that real world data comes in a variety of forms. Just now I said electronic health records. It can also involve information from that your insurance companies generate about you for those who are insured. And really what claims data tell you is, not just the outcomes achieved by the patient sometimes, but really what interventions did the patient receive? What was paid for at the point of care? As a person goes to the doctor, they have a clinical encounter with that doctor. What did the doctor diagnose them with? What were they prescribed? What treatment plan was prescribed to them thereafter, such that we might anticipate routine clinical encounters after that initial encounter, and for what purpose? That's really what claims data can tell us, because it really reflects what has been paid for. Electronic health records reflect that same information, but just in greater detail. But also electronic health records, they come with their own sets of limitations as far as, how clean that data is, how reliable it might be to the research question, how relevant it might be. A lot of that is in electronic health records a bit more granular and detailed than claims data would be, because claims data, again, reflect what has been paid for. Electronic health records reflect what has been discussed at the clinical encounter. So in addition to claims data and electronic health record data, we have this plethora of other data sources out there. That includes what I've mentioned before, social media data, even your pharmacy data, pharmacy claims data, laboratory data, wearables for those who might use Fitbits or mobile health apps. That is what could be considered wearables data or mobile app device data that might provide insights into your health behavior, your health choices, your health awareness and competency levels around health management, those sorts of things. Even information exchanges, registries, data brokers, even, everyone's just generating, collecting, and warehousing all of this data. And there right now is, as a result, an oversupply of data and a current undersupply of evidence from that data. Generating the data itself and just having it somewhere is not enough. You have to understand how to best interrogate that data or those data resources in order to glean actionable and reliable and relevant and high quality evidence from all of that data. And that takes a lot of skill, a lot of time, a lot of resources to do. And quite frankly, it's expensive, especially if you must have the data in a very specific format to meet a very specific need. And oftentimes, in the case that I mentioned in the medical product development pipeline, that need is to satisfy a research or regulatory concern that will impact a population of individuals that navigate our healthcare system. So I mentioned already some examples of what real world data are. They're listed here again. But what's great about this particular graphic, which was created and published by Galson and Simon in 2016 via the National Academies Press. What's great about this graphic is that it outlines where real world data has the most impact, or real world, not just the data, but rather where real world evidence has the most impact along the medical product development pipeline. So real world evidence can be useful in two major ways. The first way is identifying unmet needs. So where amongst all of the data noise are we finding signals about individuals who need help, signals who are currently underserved as far as treatment and care and diagnosis? What can real world evidence, tell us? What can we learn? And we often learn that by the examination, or through the examination rather, of natural history data. That often comes in the form of registry data, thinking about rare disease populations. Considering that they are rare, they often have to band together to collect their data, in a very collaborative and aggregate way in order to make their data actionable enough or usable to power studies effectively that can allow the product development pipeline to continue. And that happens at the pre-discovery or drug discovery stage, where we're trying to understand, here we have all of these symptoms, all of these people with all of these, same symptoms. They might have all of these molecular signatures that mirror one another. How do we pull all of that information together in order, or to help us go through the pre-discovery and drug discovery phase of, understanding what molecular targets might be most promising for them based on their molecular signatures, or what could be most or potentially efficacious for that population. That is, they're most likely to experience or observe an effect following treatment. And then real world evidence is useful to inform clinical and policy decisions. That's where a lot of my work falls, in fact, where we look at utilization patterns in real world data, utilization being healthcare utilization, pharmacovigilance. Once a product is released into the market, we have to remain vigilant as far as that product safety in the real world. And also outcome predictors. We need to understand the endpoints that are important to not just regulators, but patients, thinking about their quality of life, thinking about regulators who need specific endpoints to understand, is this intervention leading to a specific decrease in something clinically? Like, are we seeing a decrease in cholesterol, a decrease in adverse events associated with unmanaged disease, all types of things. And it really is disease specific. Where might we find new indications for existing therapies? Real world evidence in the post-market phase, that is phase 4, as you see here, that can be useful in those particular situations. So now we're going to dive into the first topic, now that we've got that background. So in my paper where I discussed what health systems can do or should do to achieve trustworthiness, one of the suggestions is to address complexities that might reduce or restrict access to care. You know, again, there are certain populations that are underdiagnosed or undiagnosed for various reasons, whether they carry a rare disease, whether they lack access to healthcare on a regular or routine basis, whether they express symptoms differently from individuals who might show up in the health system more often. They might express things differently simply because of their personal, situation or because of their individual biological demographic considerations. You know, how do we make sure that we're not missing opportunities to diagnose those people simply because we don't understand the full spectrum of their symptoms well enough, or at least in a robust enough manner? We need to promote a culture of non-stigma in order to achieve that. Oftentimes, people might have symptoms that are stigmatized. They might belong to groups of individuals that are socially stigmatized. And because of that, they're less likely to show up in the data. They're less likely to show up in the health system, where we can learn more about ways to capture their patient journey, their experience, capture all that in ways that might lead us towards smarter ways of identifying them and treating them just in time, so that their disease does not manifest in ways that become unmanageable down the line. So we need to closely understand individuals' data journeys, their patient journey is part of that, and their motivations and goals to engage in data-driven health research. So here's a series of papers that I published from a survey that I conducted, where I explored individuals' willingness to share real-world data with researchers. I looked at, from the survey data set that I looked at individuals of childbearing ages, what their concerns are about sharing data with researchers. I looked at individuals' willingness to share data post-mortem or after death with researchers. One interesting thing is that even though we all die today, our digital footprint remains. There are very little ways through which we can manage that legally and procedurally in the real world. And AI certainly has opportunities today to bring us back to life using our digital footprint. So that's a whole territory that we won't get into today in particular, but certainly think about that. And then I also explored just generally in a descriptive manner, how individuals' privacy-related experiences shape their willingness to share real-world data with researchers. So I looked at several different data sources, or at least I presented all of these different data sources to my survey participants. So I conducted a survey back in April 2021 with adults registered within a registry called Research Match. It's the disease-neutral web-based recruitment registry to help match individuals seeking to participate in clinical research studies with researchers within the US. And I looked at all of these data sources, I presented it to them, grouped them in this way. You've got social media data being your Facebook, your Snapchat, your Yelp reviews and ratings data. Depending on the age of some of my participants, they more or less use, some of these sources. But also looking at health data, as I mentioned before, your prescription history, your EHR, your fitness tracker data, genetic data, and then all types of other data, financial data being your credit card statement data, your geolocation data, your voting history data. What I did was I presented all of these data sources, these 19 different data sources, to see, how might they be motivated to share one or more of these types of data sources, depending on their privacy-related experiences, depending on their demographics. And my responses were quite interesting. We'll go over some of those results today before we engage in a brief discussion. But just as an overview, demographics overview, nearly 99% of the survey participants were over the age of 21. I did invite individuals 18 and over to participate. So, 21 and up was the large portion of this respondent pool. Most, or 87%, had at least some college or an associate's or straight school level of education. There were some individuals that had just high school only or a doctoral or above, and they're included in that 13% not reflected here. Just over half of the participants reported having used online medical websites for 7 years or more. So, just over half of folks engage online for health-related purposes. And most participants, or 94%, reported an annual frequency of getting ill at 6 occurrences or less. So they're generally healthy, notwithstanding a few, health issues on an annual basis. They're generally healthy. And what I found was that respondents were most willing to share their prescription history data, followed by their music streaming data, voting history data, online purchase history data, and their electronic medical record data. What's interesting is that my findings aligned with another study that asked the same question to their respondent pool, or posed these same questions to their respondent pool. And they also found that prescription history data and music streaming data were the most frequently reported data sources, as far as folks being most willing to share them. So, that's just something to think about. And then respondents were least willing to share Snapchat data. I don't use Snapchat. I have no idea what goes on Snapchat, so I couldn't even tell you why this might be. But that was followed by going up as far as willingness to share credit card statement data. That was the second least shared, or willing to share data, followed by tax records and income history data, and then Twitter data. So it seems like the popular social media data platforms, and then also financial data, people are least willing to share that in this cohort. Participants, interestingly, with a high school education were significantly more likely than those with a doctorate or other terminal degree to share credit card statement data. So I think that just goes to show that there are some education-related differences as far as willingness to share financial data. And again, this was a one-time survey. These findings should be, further validated in further studies involving other cohorts. It really is interesting to see, because this really reflects an area of data science worth diving into. And I have, some additional findings that will be interesting to you all. So in my study, where I looked at individuals' willingness to share real-world data with researchers post-mortem, or after death, among my respondents, which, the same around 399, 400, most were willing to share health data, that is fitness tracker, genetic, prescription history, and electronic health record data after death. And that, differs from what we sort of see here as far as what individuals are willing to share pre-mortem or today. So I think people are a bit more health conscious about data maybe after they die than before, as far as willingness to share that data with health researchers. Respondents were least willing to share after death their Snapchat or Twitter data, so that tracks, with pre-mortem findings, and their financial data and ride-sharing history data. So we are seeing some differences as far as what data sources people are willing to share before or after death, what they're most willing to share, but what they're least willing to share sort of tracks pre and post-mortem in a way. Again, going back to this, they were least willing to share Snapchat, credit card, tax record, Twitter data. They're still not willing to share their Snapchat or Twitter data even after death, which is interesting because, again, it's still online even after you die, depending on your privacy settings. But yeah, financial data is off limits. But ride sharing history data, they don't want to share that, interestingly, after death. Some additional remarkable findings, individuals were, and this is a continuation of what people are willing to share after death. They're more likely to donate some data after death versus no data at all. So they're not going to give all of their data. They're not going to necessarily give none of their data, but most people are going to say, well, I'll give you some of my data. And that was a statistically significant finding. Individuals willing to donate some data after death with more than 2 years of using online medical websites were more likely to donate health data. That is, again, your EHR, prescription history, genetic, and fitness tracker data. And that finding was similar to the overall population as well, where people were most likely to share that type of data. But people specifically who had 2 or more years of using online medical websites versus those without that experience. They were more likely to donate health data after death. And next, we found that participants, this is where we get into the privacy related experiences, how that motivated individuals in this cohort's willingness to share data. Individuals who report that their reputations were negatively affected as a result of posting information online, they were more likely to share their EHR and genetic data versus those without that experience. So we thought, that was interesting. That was a statistically significant finding. We thought it was interesting for two reasons. One, is it that individuals are more willing to share this data because their reputations were ruined? Is it because they have what's called a refutational aim? Like, are they trying to work with researchers to fix their reputation, after this privacy related incident happened? Or is it the case that they are just in the habit of sharing information with anyone? They share it online with everyone. They had privacy related experiences, being their reputation was affected as a result of it. And they're still willing to share their data with researchers too. Is it just in their nature to be that way? And I think this is an interesting finding because it raises a lot of, to me, bioethical considerations as far as like how data science can tell us or give us clues around individuals' behaviors, data sharing behaviors, and what might motivate them personally or ethically, or whatever the reason might be. This really shows that we need to talk to people and figure out what's going on here. A statistically significant finding like this shouldn't be just taken or considered as is in a vacuum. It really does require engagement with people to figure out what's going on. And then also participants with a master's degree were significantly less willing to share most resources of data compared to those with a doctorate or terminal degree in the event they experienced any of the 5 privacy-related experiences seen here. So looking at these privacy-related experiences, we see here that most individuals, or 51%, reported that they have not been the victim of fraud or identity theft. 63% that they've never been or experienced or had an unpleasant experience as a result of information given out online. 75% said, no, I've never had my reputation negatively affected as a result of information I posted online. That's interesting, considering that we have a statistically significant finding here that they're more willing to share health data or EHR and genetic data. 33% said, no, I've never had the privacy of my personal information become violated, although 49% said, yes, I have. And then most individuals, or 54%, said that an account of theirs was accessed by someone that they didn't, their account was accessed by someone with whom they didn't share permission. So again, this just goes to show like what people are experiencing out in the real world as they navigate on a day-to-day basis privacy management around their information, whether they share that information willingly or not. And we do have, again, some statistically significant findings that warrant conversation or consideration from an ethics standpoint. We have to understand, well, what happens in the real world? What is motivating people in the real world? What are the risks that we need to foresee and manage as we work with researchers managing real world data for their research purposes? So this is where I said we'll stop really quickly, and I want to make sure I'm doing okay on time. But I do want to chat with you all for a bit before I move into the next section. So just as a recap, privacy-related experiences and education levels influence individuals' willingness to share health and other sources of real-world data with researchers. That includes reputational reasons and so forth. Educational reasons as well. So some questions for us to talk about today. What kinds of instances come to mind in terms of reputational harm, such that those harms could motivate someone to share their electronic health record and genetic data with researchers? How might differences in higher education levels, master's versus doctorate, for example, affect trust in researchers' access to and use of real-world data for research? And also, since individuals were more likely to donate some data after death versus no data, if they had a longer duration of using online medical websites, does this tell us that there are opportunities for us to consider online medical websites as a way to reach these people? So Since online medical websites are a common and convenient source of authoritative health-related guidance in online environments, these are private online environments, or at least private and 3D, how might online medical websites become a trustworthy space for individuals to communicate and even maybe pre-specify which data they wish to donate and with whom after death? So I'll stop there. I know that was a lot to process. This is why I said I won't go over everything and save it for the end. But I would love to know what you guys think about these findings. And again, these are findings that should be validated, that are continuously being validated against emerging research on this topic. There's not a lot of papers published on this, surprisingly. But what comes to mind as you all navigate your own ethics work, especially where data is concerned? I find that there's not a lot of ethics guidance out there around data management. Oh, we have a question.
So these are medical research participants.
Yeah, well, let me get them. I think we're recording, so I'll let you talk on the microphone.
So these are medical research participants. Chat was before I.
That's a great question. So yes, these are individuals that have registered with a database to be contacted for potential or future engagement in clinical research.
So I just happened to do like a deep dive on like this culture this weekend, and many of these people end up just flying from study to study. These are like risk-seeking individuals, and this is their livelihood. But there's a weird thing that if they ever report having symptoms, they become medically ineligible for that lab's future testing. So they have very strong incentives in their health records to not report things. So it's interesting to me if they're willing to share that data, but I'm also interested in what is not in that data. 94% of them are like, yeah, false.
Sure. So you're like, what's the dark matter? You know,
And, right. And like, how weird are these people?
Yes. What makes them unique from other individuals who, you know, might be approached to sign up to engage in those? And I try to connect myself personally with these things. Like, you know, if I'm at the, and again, a lot of these people who consent to engage in these registries, they're already often engaged in the health system. They're probably sicker than most individuals, or they're, again, or maybe they're more likely to attend public gatherings where they can sign up for these things because, you know, there might be a financial motive or something. Like, what is inherent, you know, to this population of folks as far as how, and I think a lot of how they're recruited or mechanisms through which they're recruited can tell us a lot about that. But I think, again, that's also something that is understudied, underexplored, and it would be great to figure out how that relates to their privacy related experiences and data sharing patterns. Oh, I think she just got the microphone and then we'll switch.
In terms of your first question about reputational harm, I think it might be the enduring, like actually, oh yeah. What's this one? There are folks on space. Oh, it's not turning.
Yeah, we get it.
Uh-oh.
There's ceiling speakers and there's no loudly. It'll be.
Hello, there we go.
Oh.
So in terms of reputational harm, I think it might be actually enduring the harm that might motivate people to be more willing to share information, especially if they survived it and the consequences weren't as bad as they thought. So not necessarily the repair and recovery, but more along the lines of, all my information's already out there, I survived, I'm fine, and there's no point in hiding anymore because it's not that big of a deal versus someone who may be concerned about reputational harm, has not gone through it, and is taking more steps to protect themselves and their information.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because, you know, there are other patterns too that I see online where people are more likely to engage in debate or conflict online. They're more willing to share information about themselves simply because they like debating. And so, or sometimes they benefit from debating depending on how their data monetization is set up. Like, you know, are they YouTubers where the more engagement they get, the more financial gain they, you know, stand to receive? You know, again, like how are people even, you know, just incentivized personally or monetarily to, you know, keep sharing information? Is it for reputational purposes? Is it not? What's really going on there? And that's, to your point, it's an important thing to explore qualitatively beyond these findings. But yeah, I'll stop there. I do have a question too.
It's really interesting data, thanks. I was thinking a little bit about the very specific one about why folks with a doctorate be might be trusting researchers more. And one thing that occurred to me, I mean, I don't know what the actual degrees are of the people who go into the doctorate category. But certainly people who literally have a PhD are trained to do research. They're researchers.
Yeah.
They're not just people with higher education, they're researchers. And so it does not seem surprising that they would think that the research enterprise is a wholly trustworthy. Like, you can trust me, I'm a researcher, I'm gonna be good with your data, I've got all these rules I have to follow. So I can imagine that doctoral level people would have trust in researchers.
Yeah.
In a way that a lot of other people might not.
Maybe so, yeah. But at the same time, I have seen that phenomena in the real world too. But also at the same time, I've seen researchers say like, oh no, I know what goes on around broad consent. I'm not going to consent. And maybe consent mechanisms matter too. And you're right. This is something that requires a deeper dive. Like, what types of doctorate degrees do they have? Are they research doctorates? Are they more practicing, doctorate degrees, or and also, like, are they doing research? Are they not? I think certainly that these findings open doors for us to, again, explore that qualitatively and quantitatively in that regard. And I think that could be helpful to the bioethics community, because what I hear a lot is that like IRB members or administrators, for example, they have a really hard time advising researchers on data use consent. Like, is broad consent appropriate? Is more specified consent, preferred for this population? And researchers often want to go for the broad consent when it comes to data collection, because they don't know what they're going to get sometimes. And they just want to collect everything to see what the data tells them. And that's fine, but is it appropriate? And I think if you were to go about that question that you just posed, that could probably help this community understand best practices a little better in those instances where they're advising very specific types of researchers or doctoral level, faculty members. And then from there, they can parse out the recommendations a bit more effectively. But again, a lot of this research is very emerging and we need more of it. And again, I'm surprised there's not more of it.
Given the time, I think we need to.
Oh, okay.
Just one quick.
Really, really quick. Yeah.
So just real quick, so first of all, I was surprised with 45% of who was willing to give that information. But my question would be, do they know the significance of giving such information away? That's my question. Are they educated enough to know the significance of this letting all this information go?
Absolutely. And I think that depends on, again, the consent, what's in the consent document, at the time that they consent to their research or their data being used for a specific research purpose or to address specific research question. But yeah, again, these are all things to think about, and it really does open doors for more discussion. So moving on, and I just want to do a quick time check because I don't have a clock in front of me.
Yeah, so we're
Oh, okay.
43.
Oh boy, okay. Time flew. All right, so quickly I'll talk about another area of health system trustworthiness, which is evidence generation at the point of care. Implementing clinical trial designs that meet patients where they are is one way to achieve health system trustworthiness. And that can happen through what's called a point of care trial. So that is a trial that essentially is an operational approach to a pragmatic trial, which is a trial design that assesses medical product effectiveness in the presence of treatment uncertainty or clinical equipoise at the point of care. So you're talking to your doctor and your doctor says, well, honestly, there are multiple treatments out here. I don't know. I can't say in good faith that I know exactly what will work from you. But what I can do is enroll you in a study where we're randomizing folks to different treatments and treatment arms to figure this out. And this happens again in your usual care setting. This is something that doesn't deviate from your typical health seeking patterns or doctor's appointments, your doctor appointment cadence or what have you. And so point of care trials, the data comes largely from electronic medical records and supporting digital tools. All of that is used to streamline the collection of more robust data during normal patient visits. It incorporates treatment and randomization into usual care settings, as I said. And the trial results often inform key health decision makers. That includes not just the patients and the doctors, but also regulators, payers, and other stakeholders that have a vested interest in understanding what is the best value form of care, for patients with this particular profile versus, patients with that one and so forth. So it's really meant to drive what's called comparative effectiveness research. They may carry the benefit of engaging more people in clinical research by making trial participation more accessible. I'm pretty sure many of you are aware that access to clinical trials is extremely hard in this country. And so by bringing trials to the point of care, bringing it to individuals, meeting them where they are, this is a possible way to expand access to clinical trials so that everyone can have an opportunity to determine what treatment works best for them. And again, that especially works for people that have been historically excluded from clinical trials as well, especially them. They have even lesser access to clinical trials. So there are technology and infrastructure level considerations to activating these types of trials. There are opportunities today where trials conducted across multiple sites or health systems, given that there's variance in which EHR systems that they use, standardizing EHR and EMRs across participating sites can save significant time and resources. Trial sites not equipped with modified electronic health records can obtain virtual consent via web portals or by phone when they're not physically in the clinic. So there's a remote participation or decentralized trial element here that can be leveraged in these cases. And that is an opportunity that we have today. But there are some challenges that are going to require a lot of work. Integration of consent processes into EHRs can be tricky and even cost prohibitive, especially for community clinics. Other forms of consent pose additional problems like decreased patient accessibility, increased clinician workload. Consenting via web portals or phone might be difficult for some patients, especially those without reliable access to the internet or cell phone service. And these methods also add another layer of administrative complexity when they're not integrated into existing clinical workflows. So there's a huge provider burnout risk here unless we figure out who's on first, who's on second, who's on third, who's going to drive it home. And then clinical practice considerations, there are considerations around administering informed consent. Who is going to do that? In some studies, consent is obtained by trained research personnel, not the treating clinician. They want to focus on treating the patient, not necessarily, they don't want to be a cog in the research wheel. Other studies have shown that nurses are more comfortable consenting patients and physicians, but nurses are also burned out. And there's a huge, high turnover of nursing professionals today. Also notions that the doctor-patient relationship may be better preserved when treating physicians. That's more likely when they're not engaged in the task of consenting patients. So again, the patient-doctor relationship can be strengthened by not sometimes including the doctor in the consenting process. And then also, there's two-step or just-in-time consent approaches that might reduce anxiety or confusion or information overload for patients, which are typically associated with informed consent or that process. So step one, from what we've seen in the literature, a good process could be step one, provide information about general research procedures. And then step two, simply provide information about the specific experimental intervention. Now, there's one thing I want to caution you all here around this, though, that I don't think is talked about enough. And I don't mean to raise alarms, but I think we all should understand this considering, again, this is a bioethics conversation. There was a point in time during the Tuskegee experiments where individuals were participating in a study where they thought they were receiving treatment, when really they were just being observed in their natural, disease course. And so if we're going to bring trials to the point of care, we have to make it very clear in the informed consent process that they are being treated. Are they being treated or are they not? And are they being randomized? Are they not? And why? And so we don't want to, repeat mistakes of the past where we're tricking potentially individuals into thinking they're being treated when they're not. And that can especially be in cases where they might be randomized to a treatment arm that has a weaker efficacy level than other treatments. So we have to be careful about how we're randomizing individuals, what are their demographics, what ethical risks are happening here. So realizing that time is low, we'll just maybe take like 1 or 2 questions for this brief ethics discussion around that. Could the point of care trial approach benefit providers with existing patient relationships and with potential discomfort with admitting and discussing clinical equipoise? You know, are doctors comfortable saying, I don't know, or would they rather be seen as more authoritative and all-knowing around what's best for their patients? How do point of care trials contend with that? When clinical equipoise is front and center, and time is given to balance power dynamics and differentials at the point of care within the patient-doctor relationship or the patient-health system relationship, could clinicians effectively and comfortably deliver informed consent? And what patient partnership models or approaches should researchers consider at the point of care in order to preserve their patient-doctor relationship, but also ease operational and regulatory burdens and ease workload for busy providers? So, so that's maybe 1 question before I drive it home with the last section. Maybe I should have just done 1 section per lecture. Otherwise, we can move on and we'll just, okay. All right, so last we're going to talk about addressing power dynamics that don't put patients first. So you have to put patients first in order to be a trustworthy health system. And that means not just putting their data first. Everyone's thirsty for data. Companies are thirsty to get data. Researchers are very thirsty to get data wherever they can find it to drive their research. And so that means that sometimes they're more concerned about the data than they are the actual patient, unfortunately. And when you and that's why trustworthiness means putting the patient, not their data first. And it's even more important because it ensures that AI-driven data innovations work in the interest of patients, not just the patient's data. And I'm going to talk about now synthetic data in this regard. So synthetic data can be described as artificial data that maintains certain, but not necessarily all, underlying data and statistical distributions within a data set. Modern approaches to generating synthetic data involve generative AI, and each model holds a certain capability to synthesize synthetic images, digital data, real-world data sets that are analytical in nature, and that comprise even of electronic medical records, medical image or genomic data, and so forth. The only difference is that when this data is synthetic, it does not track back to a single individual or group of individuals in a way that they can be identified. But the data set is still usable for other sandbox research purposes or in order to make draw conclusions about groups of individuals that share a certain set of characteristics. Now, I want to talk about some of the ethical and legal implications to the generation and use of synthetic data. Like other methods of real-world data de-identification, and again, this going back, synthetic data is considered to be a privacy-preserving mechanism because it does not link back to an individual. So again, like other methods of real-world data de-identification, synthetic data cannot protect group level privacy or discretion because again, you can still glean insights into what's real for groups of individuals, even if you can't map that data back to a single individual. So say, for example, if the data set reflects a vulnerable social group, or it has a subset of individuals that are part of a vulnerable social group, decisions you make based on evaluating synthetic data, based on those characteristics, that can still have population-wide effects if implemented, if certain decisions are implemented at a broad scale in the real world. And like any generative model, synthetic data carries inherent risks to amplifying biases that are present within their original real-world data sets. And with respect to genomic data, there is the probability that synthetic data, that whether or not synthetic data can fully preserve the privacy of genomic data, it depends on both the technical nature and the presentation of the genomic data itself. So is this aggregate genomic data? Is this genomic data that represents a single nucleotide polymorphism? Or is it a whole genome data set about an individual? Your whole genome data is not private at all. And if there's a synthetic data set based on that, that's that's going to be tough to disentangle from a privacy standpoint. And so, oh, forgot to say, this is a paper that I published recently as a policy brief under the Duke Margolis brand. But in this paper, you'll find that there are some ethical and legal questions around best practices. So what practical assurances can researchers provide to research oversight boards or research participants today as it concerns the risk of re-identification, bias amplification, or group level discrimination following generation and uses of synthetic data? Is synthetic data generation and use appropriate for observational studies that don't have any interventions, but are just meant to observe real world phenomena and record that? And what are risks or ethical implications to disregarding potential uses of synthetic data? So if someone says, nope, synthetic data is fake, it doesn't have any, worth, are we accepting risks and just discarding the potential value of synthetic data? And that's especially true for rare disease patient groups or individuals that are underrepresented in data sets. Synthetic data has an ability to amplify those individuals within a data set so they're more represented. But again, by doing away with synthetic data, are we not maximizing on that opportunity? Or even, I'll say, by generating synthetic data to amplify a data set about poorly engaged subgroups in the data set, are we using that as a way to skirt actual engagement with those communities? So you're okay just creating synthetic data about me, but you're not okay actually talking to me to get me engaged in your study? What's up with that? So in the time that we have 4 minutes. I have 3 discussion questions for us. What are practical assurances that researchers can provide to research oversight boards and research participants around risks and benefits to known today around the use and generation of synthetic data? So are any of you in this room comfortable with your data being contributed to a synthetic data project? So you become a synthetic version of you or a digital twin of yourself? Is synthetic data generation and use appropriate for observational studies? Are there additional data sources, that can be usable or off limits? Are there any that should be off limits? What are the risks or ethical implications to, again, disregarding potential uses of synthetic data such that rare disease patients and other underrepresented groups cannot benefit simply because they're poorly represented and there are no other opportunities to remedy that? So I have some additional questions too, but I think considering that we are limited on time, I'll stop there. These questions are probably better for discussion. Do people even understand what synthetic data is, and how do you even consent to participating in a study that is focused on synthetic data? I'll stop there.
So we have time for 1 or 2 questions, depending on your length.
Time flies when you're having fun.
So I'll ask a question, which is, well, I have a bunch of questions, but in the first part of your talk, do you have plans to go back and sort of dig into those data? Because there's a ton of follow-up questions I would want to ask people, including the ones we discussed before, but also why are you okay with your online shopping history, but not your credit card data?
Exactly.
How are you thinking about these things in different ways? So the easy question is, are you following up on that with qualitative methods?
That is my plan. That will take additional resources. So when I conducted this survey, it was in April of 2021 at the height of the pandemic where people were more digitally engaged. So that might have something to do with my findings too, but I would like to, moving forward, conduct that study again in the same population to just validate the findings to see if those same patterns exist. I would like to include race and ethnicity as a demographic variable. I did not include that last time because studies show that digital engagement or race and ethnicity really don't have an effect on digital engagement. Really, that's a ubiquitous thing that people do today. But I would like to understand how race and ethnicity might play out in these instances. That's another question I have on top of the questions that we discussed today, and that will require significantly more time and resources not only to conduct the quantitative survey, but the follow-up qualitative interviews with individuals. And that will probably take some closer partnership with the research match community to be able to do that, because, you know, I want to respect the privacy of those individuals such that they don't want to be contacted, or, you know, I'm not coming to them with an actual clinical trial. It's more about coming to them to understand why they're engaging in research in the first place. That will take a lot of relationship building. And so that would require, again, a lot more time and resources that I hope to get soon.
Other questions? All right, since we're at the top of the hour, I think we'll close there. Thank you again very much.
Yeah, thank you.